evening, everybody. Welcome to Zoom at 8. My name is Julianne Peterson, and I am your host tonight, as well as every Tuesday night. I am a loan officer, originator, senior director at Old Capital, and we are specialists in the multifamily debt and equity community. So we've closed 6,500 loans. We've been in business for 35 years. And especially in this environment where you're underwriting and you're underwriting and you're underwriting, you need to be with a debt provider that can hold your hand and who has great relationships. We're a broker who has great relationships with the lenders. And we want to provide you with execution certainty because you've got hard money. You've got your investors who have been waiting to get into a deal because not all deals are created equally. And hey, listen, if it's taken you 2 years, you want to be successful, and that's what we're here to do. I launched Zoom at 8 3.5 years ago. We've closed 13 deals just within this community. So we've got a lot of people that are here as investors, as GPs, sponsors. We've got vendors. We have it all. So if you're new and you're looking to partner, I have vetted all of my partners and I open that up to you. That's kind of why it's special. When people come to Zoom at 8, we stay for quite some time. I usually have some people here in the room. I know, Jeff, you've been around for a long time with Zoom at 8. You kind of come and go, and that's fine. You take what you want, what can be helpful. So tonight is going to be another great night of visiting with professionals within this community. We've got Jeremy Goodrich with us tonight, and he is going to talk to us about podcasting. You know, there's podcasts and then there's podcasts. And I was so lucky to be invited to speak on Jeremy's podcast probably a couple of years ago. And I got to tell you, it was the best. So I wanted to make sure that I brought somebody who knows how to do this. What are the right questions? How do you engage people when it's just the two of us, thinking about what our environment, who our listeners are, and making sure that we bring those questions up. So Jeremy's going to take us through all of that tonight. Well, without further ado, let's get on with the show. We've got tonight Jeremy Goodrich, which I am super excited. If you missed the introduction, I invited Jeremy here because he invited me to his podcast a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. I loved listening to myself. Normally, I don't like it, but Jeremy was so engaging. I just loved my interview, and I thought, he has it down. He knows how to interview people. This is a great strength that he has, and I want you to meet him. There's, people say, okay, I got educated, I got a mentor, I got money. I've got a portal. How do I do this? And so I thought the next step maybe in your growth, the next step on your goals is putting together a podcast. And so why wouldn't I bring the best? So tonight, Jeremy is here. Jeremy is a real estate risk advisor who has been teaching investors how to purchase and protect properties since 2013. He is the owner of Shine Insurance, the host of the Managing Commercial Real Estate Risk podcast, and the creator of the largest independent insurance agency channel on YouTube. So Jeremy is here tonight. He's going to give us lots and lots of nuggets. Feel free as we go through this interview, if you've got questions, raise your hand. I'd love to be able to get you in and answer those questions. But before we turn it over, make sure that you are looking at only me and only Jeremy. Give us all of your attention. You go over to the right-hand side, okay, and go to speaker view. I see Dan right now. Maybe you see me, I'm not sure, but let's get it over to Jeremy. Jeremy, good evening. How are you tonight?
Julie, I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to share my journey and talk a little bit about how I built this podcasting scenario and really just like a marketing scenario as a whole. And I appreciate the invite. You really are someone who closes a lot of deals. I look up to in the world. I don't know how you do so many conferences, bottom line. But you're just out there, you're really connecting. You understand how marketing works. You understand how connecting with people works. And I hope that I can articulate to everybody here today just one more vehicle for potentially doing that.
Yeah. Well, and as I mentioned, I mean, I think there's a science, there's a gift that you have in interviewing, making sure people, you come around and you ask the question again and for clarity. And I'm just very excited for you to share some of these nuggets. First of all, where are you located? How long have you been doing this? I know you said 2013, but have you been investing in multifamily, in single family? Give us your background so we can understand the power that you bring here.
Absolutely. So I was an elementary school teacher for most of my adult life. I did that for 13 years. I was a 3rd and 4th grade teacher. And then in 2013, I decided that I was done with teaching and I wanted to be an insurance agent. That's really inspiring, right? No, I mean, I know it's not that inspiring, but I transitioned from being a teacher, and my wife and business partner was a 3rd generation insurance advisor. So in 2013, we started Shine Insurance with the goal of really changing the way people feel about insurance. And when I started in 2013, I was looking for a way to continue to be an educator, to continue to be a teacher, to continue to connect with people on a real level. I had these great relationships with kids and their families and their parents. I spent more time with a lot of kids than their parents did. And suddenly I realized a week into being an insurance advisor, like people don't see you the same way. Like there's just a different connection. So I was like, how do I really connect with people? And I read a book by Jay Baer, who's a great marketer. If you haven't read any of his books, they're all good. And he really said, really refine who your ideal client is, which is something that's fairly common in marketing right now. Every single person on this call, right, is refining who it is they're talking to. If you're a syndicator, if you have deals and you're looking for LP investors, the more you niche that down, the more you understand who that person is. Are they a doctor? Are they a teacher? Are they an accountant? Who are you talking to and how are you connecting with them? So niche down who it is that you're trying to talk to, and then just do good stuff for them. It's like that simple, right? Do good stuff for them. Doesn't have to have anything to do with your brand. Probably shouldn't really have anything to do with your product or your brand. Just do really good things for those people. And so my first ideal client, knowing very little about insurance and coming into it from a teacher's perspective, was a first-time home buyer. I felt like that was someone who I could talk to, someone I could connect with, and someone I would be able to engage. And so I started talking with first-time home buyers, and they were asking me about insurance stuff. But then they were asking me about escrow periods and closing costs and how to find a lender and how to find a realtor and what a title company is and like all this kind of basic stuff. And I realized there was a real opportunity to answer more than just insurance questions. And so in 2015 or so, I started answering these questions, but I turned on the camera to do it. So I reached out to lenders, I reached out to realtors, I reached out to appraisers and inspectors and title company owners. And I just asked them all the questions that people were asking me. I posted those on YouTube. And that's really what got the trajectory going of people connecting on this information. Teaching first-time home buyers turned into teaching people how to invest in residential properties, 1 family, 2 family, 3 family, 4. Did that for a while and then moved into commercial real estate. And really over the course of the last few years, I've been 100% focused on commercial real estate across the country. We take care of multifamily, retail, office, industrial, self-storage. So that's the space that we're at. And over the course of that entire time, I've just been trying to help that community as much as possible. And podcasting has been a primary focus in that.
Wow, that is amazing. I mean, you captured so much information there. I want to kind of go back. So a teacher. So here you are. Oh, come on now, let's everybody sit down. And you're going into real estate, or rather insurance, which is, hey, thanks, goodbye, right? So there was a challenge in that. And when you went and talked to single family homes. What was one of your biggest challenges in getting them on the phone? I mean, were you making phone calls out to try and get them to, whether it was to have you go through their policies, or because I think this is where we all kind of get nervous. Like,
Mhm.
I think it's easier to podcast than it is to pick up the phone and call these people. So I think, in a way, you really put yourself out there to be even more vulnerable,
Mhm.
making the phone calls and so forth. So kind of walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had an outbound strategy for marketing as long as we've had the agency. I've never cold called. I've never really reached out in that way. My intention and my strategy has always been inbound. And so what I mean by that is my
Wow.
strategy has been to position myself as a thought leader in the industry, to have people come to me again for that information, that value, that capacity to make them better in whatever journey they're on. And then as an outcome of that, when they think of my products that I offer, which primarily is insurance, then they're going to think of me. Right. And the podcast has been the primary way I've done that. I'll give you a great example. I've had 3 podcasts over the course of 7 years. And the first one I created was called Scratch Entrepreneur. And at that point, I was really trying to do local. The YouTube channel was doing very well for the first-time home buyers. I wanted to connect with some business owners. And I didn't really have any specific type of business owner. I just wanted to connect with local business owners. And so I called the podcast Scratch Entrepreneur, people who built their businesses from scratch. And I interviewed folks who were local to my area in Bloomington, Indiana, here about an hour south of Indianapolis. And it's amazing, one of the powers of podcasting is, if I had reached out to any one of those restaurant owners, any one of those manufacturers, any one of those folks that I was thinking might be a nice connection to be able to work with on the insurance side, and said, hey, I would love to sell you some insurance. Would you like to sit down and talk about it? Everyone would scatter. No one's interested in that conversation. That's true for most topics. If you went to people and said, hey, I want to work with you on a loan, maybe they say yes. Maybe you talk to 200 people and 1 or 2 says yes. Most of them say, hey, buzz off. I don't know you. I don't like you. I don't trust you. I have no connection with you. Buzz off, right? But if you go to someone and you say, look, I've got a podcast and I've been kind of studying what you're up to, studying what you're doing, and you're really you inspire me. I would love to sit down with you for 45 minutes, hear your story, let you tell your story, and put that out to my community. You can share it with your community. It can be something, a cornerstone of your own marketing capacity, that you can put that out there into the world. It is amazing who says yes to that. I've spoken with hundreds of people on my podcast over the course of 7 years, most of whom I had no right being in the same room with, right? They were willing to sit down with me because the concept of being on a show, even as in 2015, when I started this, there were a lot fewer podcasts than there are now. But even as podcasts saturate the world, there's over 2 million podcasts out there right now.
Yeah.
People still love to sit down and talk about their story. And there are so many amazing stories out there that aren't being told. And so you just put those 2 things together. It's your ideal client, the person that you want to serve. Everyone in this room should have someone who they want to serve. And while you're listening to me talk, should be able to bring that up in your head, an exact story of that person, a name of that person, what they look like, what they do, who their spouse is, where they live. The better you can refine this concept of an ideal client, the better you can do this work, and then go out and try and serve them. And I feel like podcasting is just one of the best ways to do that.
Well, and being that was how many years ago that you did the
2015, so seven years ago.
amazing. I mean, we've been doing the Old Capital podcast probably 8 or 9 years. And what we have found is that the good ones stay. There's a lot, 2 million is a lot. And I would tell you, you're probably here to say, just go for it, right? Go for it. Do a platform, learn, get involved, right? I mean, it's changed the way you do business.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that you can figure out what the rate of people that come to you after being on the podcast, or is there a way to measure your engagement to selling them a policy? Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so here's my philosophy on podcasting. So many people think as I'm talking, and maybe you're thinking right now, well, I'm not going to get a ton of listeners. And I just don't know how am I supposed to build something that's big? I'm not a comedian, I'm not that crazy. I'm not that funny. I don't have this wild of a story. I think that my listener base has never been that big. So I get about 250 to 300 downloads for every episode of my show, about 1,000 downloads a month, which is pretty mediocre. I mean, it's not bad. It's not great. Right. And what I care most about is the person that I bring on as the guest. So if podcasting is something you've considered, you want to do, yes, maybe you'll become a famous podcaster. Certainly one of my friends, Adam Shibley, I love this guy so much. He came on my podcast, Scratch Entrepreneur, about 5 years ago. And he was like, I love this. I want to do this so much. And he went out and he started his own podcast. And he's now had 3 or 4 podcasts. Many of them have tens of thousands of downloads every single month. He started a business based on teaching other people how to podcast. His entire life has changed because of podcasting. Sure, that could happen to you. For me, that's not my intention. My intention is, as I mentioned before, to sit down with important people for 45 minutes. And has that turned into business? Absolutely. It really started the commercial real estate thing when I was like, okay, I want to focus on commercial real estate and nothing else. The podcast is what got me into the community. The podcast is what gave me the opportunity with 2 or 3 or 4 people. And then I killed it for them and they started talking to their friends. And now it's a mix between podcast and referrals and other elements like this, right? And so all you're really looking for is the snowball to get things started, the capacity to invite someone to do something else. If you think about in a meetup room like this, right? You find someone in here right now that you're like, oh, I'd love to connect with them. And it's like, what should I say? I could go over to the DMs. Many of you might be talking in the chat right now. And what could I say? And one of the things I say oftentimes is, hey, you're pretty awesome. I would love to have you on my podcast. Would you be interested in coming on? It gives you something to engage with someone on, right? Mm-hmm. And so, your question was, how much money has it made me? And I would respond by saying it's essentially built my program and what I'm doing right now. So I'm not sure I can give an exact number, but it's my everything. It's that tier below LinkedIn, that tier below a meetup, that tier where you're taking someone now that they know you. Let's connect with them and not get them, because I'm not for manipulate. Like, let's connect with them and see if we like each other, yeah. And you certainly find that out on the show.
Wow. Really wonderful. So going through knowing that you wanted to go into commercial and figuring that whole thing out, have you decided that you too want to be an investor in commercial real estate, or are you just looking to provide this service, and be an insurance guy?
Yeah.
Tell me your path there.
So I think everyone has to have an active income and a passive income until your passive income takes away your need for an active income, right? And so a lot of people engage in real estate from an active perspective. You do JV deals, you do GP team deals, you do flips, you do whatever you're doing. It's your active time, it's your active energy. You're putting that money in. And then if you're smart, you're turning that money into passive some way or another. For me, my active income is serving the community. I have no interest in being on a GP team. I have no interest in being an active investor. I am getting my active income from serving this community. I absolutely am a passive investor in many of the deals that I take care of. So that's the way that I'm creating passive income. And so I'm combining the active income of being a service provider to the commercial real estate world and the passive income of investing in a lot of those deals and being an LP investor.
That is amazing. That is really a smart move. You've really done a really good job of figuring this whole thing out.
I think a lot of service providers just balance this active, and I've never really understood how you can be an active investor and a service provider. It just doesn't seem like you can do both of those things well. And so when service providers say, you know, I'm an active investor, I get it. If those two things balance well, great. The folks that I know that are doing both usually end up leaning towards the investing side because that's where their passion goes, and the service provider side starts to wane. I know lots of lenders who have done that, other insurance agents who have done that. And that's just not my path.
Got it. Yeah, really good. Well, let's talk about how and what you decided, how long you would make these, how you reached out to people. How did you set up your automation to this? Talk to me about your equipment. How did you decide? What do you recommend? Because all of that, even going back to listening to the podcast that I was on with you, your equipment sounds fantastic. So, tell me a little bit about that.
So let me break that up into two things. One is how you create the conversation in the show. And then the second thing is how you set up the structures and systems, right? These are two different things. And so I love talking about the show first. When you think about how to create a podcast, it's interesting to a listener. The first thing you have to ask is why. If you're going into it and saying, I heard Jeremy, I think that's great. I just want to talk with people for 45 minutes and get to know them. Well, if that's where you stop, your show's going to suck. I mean, it's not going to be very good, right? And so you've got to take it a little bit further. And you're going to say, why do I have this show? I started Scratch Entrepreneur, my first show, and I already described what that show was about. Maybe it wasn't a great title. Maybe it wasn't even the greatest premise, but it worked and it was focused, and that was that thing. The next show I created was called REI Clarity. That's the show you came on.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. It served me for about 100 episodes. And then I was like, REI is too general. I'm into commercial real estate and I manage risk. Risk is what I do. So how can I refine this show to speak more specifically? And I created a show title that maybe isn't the greatest in the world. It's called Managing Commercial Real Estate Risk, but it is specific to exactly what it is that I'm doing. My why is to help teach people how to understand risk at a higher level so that they can build the profit in their portfolio, because the people that understand risk at the highest level are the ones succeeding, the ones who have thousands of doors, and the ones who are making a lot of money off of their commercial real estate portfolio. And I wanted to expose that a little bit in my show, right? So what is your why? What's the purpose behind your show? And then I think you have to, especially if you're interviewing people who aren't professional speakers. I remember, I'll come back to Jay Bear. I mentioned him earlier. I had interviewed probably 70 people before I interviewed Jay Bear, and I was interviewing local people who were business owners. And it was great and it was fulfilling, but it was hard work. When you're trying to wrangle someone in on a conversation and they're looping out into other things and redundant, and maybe they're a little nervous, and so they start saying things over and over again, you really have to wrangle people. And then I talked with Jay Bear. He is a Hall of Fame keynote speaker across the country. He makes, I don't know how much he makes for his keynote speeches, way more than, a lot. And so he came on my show and he just killed. And I was suddenly like, oh, like it's a lot easier to be a host if you're talking with people who know how to speak publicly. And so I don't know what the right answer is with that, but I think that you have to figure out a structure to your show. So if you're speaking with someone who's never been on the air before, that you can control that conversation. And the way I like to do this is by creating 3 10-minute segments. And I'm going to say, okay, in this conversation, I'm going to focus on risk at the beginning. Or maybe I'm going to focus on the story of the person at the beginning. You asked me to tell my story quickly at the beginning, right, Julie? That's a common way to start. I'm going to focus on the story of the person. We're going to dig into the person as a human. The middle section is going to be really the content, the thing I know that they're an expert on. I'm going to pull that expertise out of them. And the third section is going to be maybe my 5 questions I ask everyone, or a funny game, or something that sort of lightens the mood, but still stays on topic so our listeners are interested. A nice 30-minute show, 10-minute, 10-minute, 10-minute. Now we've got something that listeners can handle, even if a speaker maybe isn't the best speaker, and we have some way to stop the speaker from a ramble that might be happening and direct them into a new conversation or a new topic. And so I think that's really a focus, no matter what you do. If it's a YouTube channel, if it's, something else, if it's a podcast, really structuring it so that you give the person space to talk themselves, and yet you have some way to pull the ripcord if you're losing them. So I think those are just some pieces of advice. And then the last thing, I think, if you really are thinking about creating a show, I want you to complete this sentence, and it's really, really hard to do. This show is about blank. This show is about, and it's interesting because blank. The show is about, what is this show about? And it's interesting because, that second part's the hard part. And it's interesting because why? Why is it interesting? If you can complete that sentence in a way that you can share with someone at a party, it probably has potential to be successful. So that answers the question about the content of the show. You asked about my structure and how I can only spend 3 hours a month and have a weekly podcast go out. I would love to dig into that, but Julie, I'll just stop and see if you have any questions about that part.
No, I think that is, I love that information this show is about, because I think that it's real easy to go big and broad, and it doesn't attract people. And I know you said REI clarity it wasn't as great, but I thought you did a wonderful job of highlighting what we were doing, why we were doing it, and how we're helping people. And I think I thought it was great. But at any rate,
Maurice Philogene did too. I was hanging out with him recently, and so he came on the show. And if any of you haven't followed Maurice Philogene on Facebook or on LinkedIn, a great follow. When he came on REI Clarity, he had not sussed out his 5 freedoms yet. He really hadn't talked about them before, but he knew that he had experienced them in his own life. He had been a police officer. He had, I think, worked in the FBI, been to 90 different countries, speaks 5 different languages. He's just got a great story. And he'd been investing in real estate for a long time and had found financial freedom, or was finding it at the time, but had never learned how to talk about it. And he came on my show, and for whatever reason, it just congealed in that conversation. And so when we were talking recently, he was like, you killed REI Clarity? Like, that's where it all started for me. Yeah. So I don't know, I just felt like it was a little general.
Well, I got to tell you that I had him on the show, and I did go back to your interview with him because it was so great. So, that was just a little bit of feedback for you. And, I do like how you have identified exactly your purpose in your new podcast. And I think, something that everybody needs to really understand is you got to structure this. You have to have a purpose. You have to have a reason. You have to have, and I again, going back to how you've structured the content, that is wise. Now, did you do that by taking a course? Did you learn from anybody in particular that you would want to share here, that was somebody that was very helpful in your growth in doing a positive podcast?
Kind of. So I think so. Alex Bloomberg, if any of you know him, a great. He started Gimlet Media, was a part of NPR before that. I think he did This American Life and the Money podcast on NPR, whatever that is. But he has a pretty great course that I took a long time ago. I think that being a teacher actually helps a lot, because what I do in podcast conversations that seems to work well is really, really listen. And then my only verbal intent when I'm the host is to reiterate what my guest just said in a really, really succinct way, and then ask the next question. And so as I'm listening to a guest talk, I'm taking notes. Is this a top 3 things for syndicators, for how a syndicator attracts an investor? Is this, the top 3 reasons why you should go with a mortgage broker as opposed to someone else? I'm trying to, as the host, distill what's being said by the guest. And when they stop talking, I generally say, so what I just heard you say was, and I reiterate that really simply and succinctly. And then oftentimes I say, am I getting that right, or am I off? And generally the guest will then have some additional thing to say on top of that. So what the listener has experienced is a real life story someone has just told about their actual experience, and then me synopsizing that, breaking it down to its most basic points, and then them adding a little bit on the top or on the end to continue. And then we ask another question. We go through the same cycle again.
Oh, it is fantastic, Jeremy. You really have structured it really well. I just want to commend you once again on the way you've structured this and reiterating what they just said. Again, I go back to when I spoke on your podcast, and it was, you really brought it back around, because if I go off on a tangent, you're going, okay, let's just break that down for everybody, for my listeners, because you can lose so many people that you don't even realize it. So I do like that idea. So let's go back to the equipment that you use, that process of determining what is the best, and then also talking about, I think you do a recording before on of the guest, so that you're ready to roll into it immediately. And then also, you know, do you use a VA? Do you do this all by yourself? Kind of great. Let's go through that.
Okay, so as far as let's see, the first question was, let's see, there's the equipment, but then what was the first question? There's two pieces: the equipment.
Well, before you go, you make you interview the person, you have taken, you've spoken, right? You do your own recording to introduce them, so you're not spending the time introducing them.
So here's how I structure it. So I have a Calendly link, which has some questions in it. And so if someone wants to be on the show, I send them the Calendly link. They go in, they answer the questions, including, have you sent me a headshot via email? My email is jeremy@shineinsurance.com. Are you cool with me using this in all sorts of different ways, right? If you've been on shows before, you know, there's questions and they're set up there. So I have the questions ahead of time. We're booked on the Calendly link. We go into the meeting. I've done no pre-recording when we sit down. In fact, I've stopped really researching people too much beyond 5 or 6 minutes before the meeting. I found that if I listen to another podcast they've been on or engage any deeper than that, then it takes away from my learning of who they are. In fact, the less I know about a person, the better the conversation tends to be. So I jump into the conversation with some notes, who they are. I work really hard on introducing the person and their accolades quickly, but some things that maybe other people haven't noticed about them. Just on LinkedIn, you can find a few things like that. And so I quickly introduce the person, and then I dig right into the conversation. We have a great conversation. We've already talked about that. We hang up on the call, and Zoom records this and saves it for me. While Zoom is recording, I take my thoughts and feelings from that conversation, which are right there, right then, right? And I take 2 or 3 minutes and I do an intro. So, hey, welcome to the Managing Commercial Real Estate Podcast, where we believe if you identify, understand, and manage the risk, you will exponentially increase your profits. I'm your host, Jeremy Goodrich, and on the show today, you will not believe the conversation we had. And I dig in. Right. And so I'm freshly out of that conversation with the person. And so I'm inspired, I'm educated, I'm knowledgeable about the topic that the person just brought to us. Right. And so my 2 minutes up front has knowledge that, you know, I make sure not to give away too much about the conversation, but it brings some tidbits from the conversation and then digs in. And then I, let that go. I record that. I used to record an outro as well. Thanks so much to Julianne Peterson for coming on the show and sharing, blah, 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 take it from there. I record all those things and save them into Dropbox. And that is the last time I touch that episode until it's out and done. And for someone who's been on the show, you know that what you get if you've been a guest on our show is an email that has a whole bunch of assets. It has an image with you and your name and the name of the show. And all set up. It has a few quotes that are set up so you can throw them on social media. It has a short minute. You all have seen this on social media. all these different podcast assets, right? A minute long snippet from the show. That's all done by a VA team. I pay about $100 to $120 an episode to be able to have my person do that. I found them on Upwork. She is amazing. She's been my podcast editor forever. Here's what she does. She audio edits the show. She makes all those assets I just described. She writes the show notes. She uploads all that information onto our website. She writes a social media post. She posts that social media post on our Managing Commercial Real Estate Risk page on LinkedIn, our page on Facebook. So she doesn't post to my personal pages. Some people do that. That's not how I do it. And that is all a part of the package that she provides. And so I literally have the conversation, record the intro, upload it to Dropbox, and move on with my life. And so, that took a structure. Now, that made it sound really, really easy, Julie.
Yeah.
And it does take a lot more than that, right? We did the design work. She didn't do the design work with me. I did the design work with an actual designer, and then taught her how to do it from that. So there was definitely a training process. As any of you have used VAs know, there's a training process to working with a VA. But the person I work with is killer, and she does an amazing job. I think the price I just threw out is probably a little low for what you go out and find for that, in general. But then you can spend a lot more money. I mean, you can have someone, help you with the social media, go out there and get likes and connect with people on Messenger and grow your audience. It's just, this was the amount of money I was comfortable spending and the amount of investment that I was comfortable doing. And the last thing I will say is equipment, which is a really simple answer, and that is whatever works. I spent probably about $1,000 on the equipment I have and I'm using. My friend Adam Shively, I talked about at the beginning of this, he spent $100. He bought a microphone. He plugged it into his Macintosh laptop and he recorded his show on GarageBand. I get about 250 downloads an episode. He's getting thousands of downloads an episode. He is amazing at what he says. The equipment simply does not matter if the content is valuable.
Wow, that's profound. I'll tell you.
His podcast is a lot more profound than mine.
Well, I mean, I'm picking up so much information here. I know our audiences as well. I don't know if you share your VA's contact information or not, but that was a question.
Yeah, if you could reach out to me, I'll share my email. And if you want to reach out to me, I can share her contact. That would be fine. She's I believe open to new clients. I would want to kind of just check in.
Yeah, we can get that from you. No worries.
I'm going to put my emails in the chat right there.
Okay, and she posts to YouTube. She posts to all of the social media sites. Do you have a sense of which one is most used? Do you just use all of them? Is there a cost associated? Kind of walk me through that as well.
None of them are very good. I think, podcast assets have some value. It's good to put them out there. But like on LinkedIn, a normal post that I post almost daily on LinkedIn, and a normal post that I post that I wrote, that I thought about, that I put energy in, that I just, talked on LinkedIn gets somewhere between, 2,000 and 4,000 impressions on a good day, right? And most of my podcast stuff gets like 500 or 600 impressions. It just, there's the place where podcasting works is on podcast platforms. I think is probably the biggest answer. But then those little snippets. So one of the great ideas I think is out there is like when your show goes live. So you had somebody on, you did all the stuff, and now the show is going live. This is the best point to engage with that other person. Why don't you go live on Instagram? So you can go live on Instagram. You can bring the other person in. You're live on Instagram. Hey, Julie, great conversation we had. Podcast just came out today. I want to ask you just a few questions about some of the things we talked about in the show. Does that sound good to you? And you're like, yeah. So we're live on Instagram doing that. Now, I am scared to death of live. I don't know why. It's probably just the old man in me or something. But I think the people that do that really well have so much success. And so I think that just having your VA post to Facebook, post to LinkedIn, post to Instagram, I'm not sure you're going to get the kind of benefits you would get by having an additional strategy above and beyond. Now you've got this content. What are you going to do with this content? Now you got this relationship. What are you going to do with this relationship? And I think that really is where things shine.
Interesting. Well, I would encourage you to take the next step on Instagram. You would do fantastic. But I know that does take time, right? I mean, to get both people on and so forth. So
Yeah.
what are things that we should watch out for? I know you talked about kind of having a new speaker, okay, and trying to work through that. What other challenges? I know, you talked a little bit about setting it up with the VA. That is a challenge. I know that for sure. It takes a lot of time to hold their hand. I have a VA that works, and I have to constantly be on them. They make mistakes. We have expectations. They're not meeting those expectations. So that is some of the challenges that I have had. How about you?
So I'm going to go to a slightly higher level. I agree. All those things are important. I am a systems geek. I could talk about systems all day. That's for another conversation, but that is the way I deal with VA teams, is just my systems are really, really tight. But I think the biggest mistake that's out there is, I'll use a sports analogy. I love sports. When you step up to the plate, you can strike out, right? And every time you get someone on your show, every time you get that engagement, it's like going to coffee with someone. If you go to coffee and you went out the night before and drank way too much and you're hungover and you're not connected, that's worse than having never gone to coffee with that person in the first place, right? And so you have to bring your whole self to every engagement with a person on a podcast, in a meetup conversation, whatever it is. Like, if you can't bring your whole self, then don't show. And well, there's things in my brain that like argue with that, but I'll just stick with it, because you really have to be able to be present and be able to engage with the people that you're with. I think the biggest mistake I see, and the biggest mistakes I tend to make, are walking away from an engagement and being like, man, I blew that engagement. I gave myself the opportunity. I did all the work to give myself the opportunity, and then I blew the engagement. And so I would say the thing you do the most is try and make things good. Try and make spend the money on a little bit of design work to make sure that those assets you send out after the podcast look, decent at least. Try and make sure that you put some time. I know I said I use a limited amount of time, but I've also been doing this for 7 years. So after a while, you get like a muscle memory, and some questions to ask if you can't think of anything else and stuff like that. Put enough time into it that your guest feels like you care about them.
What's your time? Like, how long does it take you to prepare? What would somebody, I know you've been doing this for a while, but what would your recommendation be for preparation time?
I think if you're just starting out, like, I would say a day before you're going to interview someone, get out a notepad or whatever it is you use for note taking, and put that person's name at the top, put their accolades up at the top. Take 5-10 minutes to research that person, come up with a couple questions. The reason I say 24 hours before is that kind of gives you the time to marinate on the person, what they do, and what kinds of questions you might have. If you do the 5 minutes before, you don't, the weakness and the way I do it is that you don't have the time to marinate and think of that perfect question for that person. So if you're new at it, if you're not as confident as an interviewer, if it's just something you haven't done a ton before, I would start early. I would have 10 questions for each section. And then I would not ask the same exact questions every single time for every single section of your conversation. There are people that have successful podcasts that do that. I just think you have to let the person talk. And one of the keys to a good interview is if in your head you're asking a question, you have to verbalize that, because everyone listening to your show is asking the same question in their head. And if they don't get an answer, they're going to stop listening to your show and go listen to someone else's.
That's true. Very, very, very true. Really good. So would that be words of wisdom? I think that was a great thought there, but is there anything else that you would think would be great words of wisdom?
You said it at the beginning that you thought I was going to say this back then, and I guess I'll say it now. I do think that there's an element of just do it. There is an element of you have to put yourself out there. You have to hit record. You have to reach out. Maybe someone, while I've been talking, has gone and reached out to someone else in this meetup and said, hey, can I have you on the podcast that I don't have yet, or whatever, or, can I come on your show? Reaching out. I guess that would be another word of wisdom is, if you don't have a show yet, try and get on other people's shows. Get some reps talking and pausing and letting people listen, and, read a book, listen to other podcasts, and listen to how great speakers speak. If you're funny, be funny. I guess that's the last thing too, is just like, be yourself. It's so important. I'm not that funny. I'm just a teacher. And so I just try and teach. If I tried to be funny, it would all go south.
No, it's not just a teacher. You're very good at what you do, and I want you to know I do appreciate it, and our listeners here do appreciate it as well. Can you give a plug again for the podcast that you're doing currently, or that we can go and watch you?
Sure. Yeah. So the YouTube channel is just Shine Insurance. The podcast is Managing Commercial Real Estate Risk. We talk about risk as a whole. We are not talking about insurance. We're talking about how to manage the risk. It's really about great decision-making, great mindset stuff. And so that's the show.
Awesome. Well, we really do appreciate all the tips. I mean, we could probably continue to talk for another hour and get some more, but I want to open it up to everybody and make sure that we've got all of their questions answered. How do you add value if you're new? How does one stay consistent and get to 50 to 100 episodes? And when do you start seeing any traction?
I love that first question. Ari, such a good, how do I add value if I'm new? And I really think that can have to do with connecting. My wife said to me earlier tonight, she was like, if you want to play more pickleball, I'm just starting to play pickleball. If you want to play more pickleball, start a group of people playing pickleball. Go out and find the right, you being a connector takes no knowledge. It just takes the capacity to say, hey, I've got a forum, let's go do it, right? So I think that would be it. The more quickly you can connect with people who do have experience. I talk about syndication in this way all the time. You can be a capital raiser with zero experience. I'm sure many of you have experienced this in this room. You have to have a sponsor that has tons of experience. You have to have an asset manager that has tons of experience. And if you can get in the room, anyone's going to let you raise capital if you can properly do it in a way that makes their work better, right? So adding value is by being in the room, by connecting people, by being able to boil something down that other people maybe can't. That would be my answer there. And staying consistent has to do with not making it take all of your time. When I wasn't consistent, it's when I edited every single one of my own podcasts and tried to cut all the ums and ahs and a's out of it. And I spent 3 or 4 hours just audio editing, let alone creating assets. My first show, I did almost all the work myself. And I would say, consistently comes from a little bit of investment. I know I have the ability to invest maybe in a way that not everyone can, but I think you can find VA folks, you can find folks on Upwork, you can find folks on Fiverr. You can put $30 or $40 into an episode and take it from there. So those would be my answers there. When did I start seeing traction? Sometimes I don't know if I've started seeing traction yet. I think you start seeing traction when you engage with, I have started seeing traction. But I guess you start seeing traction when someone calls you and for whatever the next level of your process is, right? You say, when someone says, I want to be on your podcast, when someone says, I heard your show and it was great. I love the comments on my YouTube channel. There's something about someone saying, I didn't even know how to buy a house, and I watched your 20-minute video on how to buy my first house,
Wow.
and it changed it changed my life. I was able to dig in. And I don't know if that's traction or not, but it certainly fills my soul.
It's a lot of work, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Zoom at 8 just doesn't happen. It's a week-long process. You have to get speakers, you have to think about it, you have to let it marinate, you have to reach out, you have to get your content, you have to get other people's information. It's a lot, it's an act of love, and it never stops. And if you
Mhm.
stop, you don't know if your business is going to continue. So you have faith that
Yeah.
you are providing something that's helpful for others. All right, let's quickly get to this. How do you time the 10-minute sessions during recording? Are you thinking about it? Are you watching the clock? How do you do that?
Super loosely. I
Yeah,
mean, I barely
yeah,
follow my own rules. But I think
okay,
for someone who is, again, back to if
yeah,
you're newer, I mean, you could even bring it into your show. All right, 10 minutes start right now. And then you got a dinger that can be heard by the listeners, right? Oh,
mm,
10 minutes are up. Sorry, you were in the middle of that story. Let's wrap it up, and so I feel like that could have a lot of value. It really has to do with where your comfort zone is. And, if you want to let someone go on for 2 hours, that's up to you. That's just what's worked for me.
yeah,
But I've thought about having dingers. I kind of wish I had
yeah.
sound effects. I feel like those would be fun.
Oh, that's fun. All right. If we want to get a hold of you, I know it is Jeremy at shineinsurance.com. Is there any other way that you would want somebody to engage with you?
Sure. So for multifamily investors, I do have a tool. It's at shineinsurance.com/ballpark. And it's a quick 9 yes or no question thing where you can get a ballpark write off. So if you're front end underwriting, if you're just penciling a deal, you don't really know that market that well, shineinsurance.com/ballpark, that should help you out with your underwriting. And yeah, pretty much anything you want to find about me is at shineinsurance.com.
Oh, awesome. Jeremy, thank you so much. On behalf of everybody here and the followers that we have on YouTube, this gets put out to the thousands that enjoy listening to our speakers and our people that are doing this on a daily basis. So thank you so much for your time.